Are you new here, by the way?
Yeah.
As you know, we're having a semi-quinticentennial. July.
For you to say.
Don't ask me to say that again. I made a note of some of the local attractions that I would like to urge you to take advantage of during this year. I'm aware personally of quite a number of historical sites, national parks and so on that are having special cleanup days, new signs installed, their walking trails cleaned up, etc. And it's just a good idea, a good opportunity to get out and see some of these things while we have the opportunity. I tried to pick these that are local. How many of you know where the English fort was on Lake Keowee? 2 or 3 of us. It was on the Pickens County shore. Of course, it's the site itself is underwater, but it was built there to manage the fur trade between the Cherokee Indians and the English, because the English imported a lot of furs from the United States area. So the name of that fort escapes me at this moment, but it's interesting. The archaeological work that was done there before the location was flooded is at USC, and I'm presuming that it could be available for further research. I'm also aware that Pickens County has on their books an activity to rebuild that fort and the site. So maybe if we...
Underwater?
No. Hopefully some of us will get to see that when they get it completed. I don't know how their fundraising is going though. Also on my list, Walhalla, of course, has the Cherokee Museum, and you get a good sense of the local area where the Cherokee lived, many small settlements as well as larger ones. And their activity resulted in the naming of 6 Mile and 96 and some of these other places that you hear talk about. So that is good background for our geography. How many of you have been to Cowpens?
Mm-hmm.
Good. That's an interesting area, very visible, easy to get to. How about Kings Mountain?
Tennessee.
Good, glad to see that. How about 96?
I know it.
Excellent,
All right.
good. How about Camden? Several, okay, good, excellent. That's the exhaustion of my list. So these folks are well-traveled.
Yes?
Good luck trying to tell them something new.
Oh, impossible.
Okay.
Impossible.
I'll give you Jim, and I'll sit up.
President Douglas, thank you. And hello, everybody. A little bit smaller turnout today, but we'll make up for it in quality over quantity. I also think we missed last month, and my apologies from a health issue, and we also had a mix-up with Friday Flyer. We put out a correction, and I'm not sure everybody got it, so we'll get back up to our normal numbers. year, today or next month. Last time we met, we were talking about the assassination of President Kennedy, and we got up to November 22nd, and we got up to, well, about noon, shortly before the actual assassination. And so we're gonna more or less pick that up today, but since we all know so much about it, many of us remember it, a good number of us remember it, I'm going to not go through every detail. I'm going to instead try to focus on some of the conspiracy theories that have popped up over the years. The most egregious is the movie JFK by Oliver Stone. This is full of mistakes, or at least incorrect points, factually incorrect. So I think I'll focus on that with your permission, and as always, feel free to ask questions, make comments, tell me you agree or if you don't agree, and we'll take it from there. And again, you're going to discover, if you don't know, that almost all the conspiracy theories, I think, have been proven over the years to be incorrect. But it doesn't mean you have to believe that, or that you do believe that. So feel free as we're going through to discuss it. I will tell you that a poll that was done last year, the Gallup poll, showed that 65% of Americans believe that John Kennedy was killed as a result of a conspiracy, that there was more than one gunman. I think they're wrong, but it's still 65%. When the motion picture JFK came out, the Kevin Costner movie, which of course got an enormous mileage, and you can still see it on streaming. When that came out, the number went up to about 85% thought it was a conspiracy. And then over the years, it's moved down to about 65, which is still considerable. One study I saw indicated that a real indication of the conspiracy, belief in conspiracies, is that a lot of young people, when you ask them about the Kennedy assassination, right, yeah, exactly. They know who JFK is, but when they start telling you about the assassination, it's what the movie said, which is really unfortunate. But you know, they don't watch. Many of them don't watch documentaries, but they watch the Kevin Costner, Oliver Stone movie, and so they have all these ideas in their head. Really unfortunate, but again, it shows you the power of motion pictures. Because we did discuss in some detail last time the assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, and so forth, I'm going to just very briefly touch upon some of the things we discussed 2 months ago. I'm not going to go through all of it, but again, some of you were here, some of you weren't, and to put things in, I think, in the proper context, I'm going to hit a few highlights that I think are relevant. By the way, this is President Kennedy, of course, Vice President Johnson, Jackie Kennedy in Fort Worth on the morning of November 22nd. This is also Fort Worth, about less than 90 minutes before the president was murdered. And you see John Connally, Governor Connally, of course, was also hit, and Vice President Johnson. And I mentioned this book before. There are about 2,000 books, if you can believe that. About 2,000 books have been written about the Kennedy assassination. It is believed it is the most written about historical event in American history, which is unbelievable. You think, well, what about Lincoln, George Washington? But no, it's the assassination of President Kennedy. And if you're going to pick one, this is, by the way, like me, a skeptic of most of the conspiracy theories. Gerald Posner's book, which was written in the 90s and later updated, he's still very much alive. He still lectures. I think it is the most well-researched book that I've read, so I'd recommend that. Before, however, we go to Dallas, I want to bring up something else that's very much related. It's also about the assassination of the president in November of 1963, but it's not just John Kennedy. In this case, it's the president of South Vietnam. And we tend to look at the Kennedy assassination kind of all by itself, and it's important historically to look at the context, what was going on at the time that was very much in the minds of the president and many other people. And Vietnam is, in the coup of November '63 is very much part of that. You might summarize it by saying there were, by November of '63, there were two important men in Washington who had strong misgivings about our commitment to South Vietnam, strong misgivings as to whether or not the government there could survive and defeat the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, and also had grave reservations, I think it's fair to say, about sending ground troops to Vietnam. One was the Undersecretary of State, George Ball, B-A-L-L, who will become very much in conflict with President Johnson later. But he played a very important role at the State Department. And the other is President Kennedy himself. And one indication of Kennedy's growing skepticism is this man. This is Roger Hilsman, Assistant Secretary of State for Far Eastern Affairs. Okay, this is something I said. It's funny, it's still on the, there it is. Magic. He was appointed by JFK, which is why I think he's important, because he was very much a skeptic about the future of the American commitment to South Vietnam. Hilsman is H-I-L-S-M-A-N. Here he is meeting with President Diem in 1963. Kennedy had known him for a long time. He put him into a key position in the State Department. He called him quite a few times in the months leading up to into November of '63. And on more than one occasion, he complained to Hilsman that he thought the reports he was getting from Robert McNamara, his defense secretary, and the reports he was getting from generals on the ground in South Vietnam were wildly optimistic, and he was concerned about that. Another indication of Kennedy's growing concerns about Vietnam was we had an U.S. ambassador to South Vietnam who was very close to the Diem government. Kennedy recalled him and replaced him with, of all people, Henry Cabot Lodge. And LDGE, here's Henry Cabot Lodge Jr., actually. His father also having been famous. Senator from Massachusetts, defeated for re-election in 1952 by John F. Kennedy. ambassador to the United Nations under Eisenhower for 8 years, Republican nominee for vice president, running with Richard Nixon and losing in 1960 to Kennedy and Johnson. So again, very much someone who'd been a political opponent of JFK's twice. Kennedy respected him. He also knew that he shared his concerns about Vietnam and his skepticism, so he put him in. He was a very different kind of American ambassador, much more blunt and direct, and with both President Diem and with the generals. So again, we'll never know. One of the questions you get all the time about the Kennedy assassination is, would he have sent, as Lyndon Johnson did, 525,000 ground troops to South Vietnam at its height? Well, the answer is, we don't know. We'll never know. We can't possibly know. But there are certainly a lot of indications, and I think personnel that I just outlined says a lot, that John Kennedy might not have, that he was skeptical, and we also know that he told Arthur Schlesinger Jr., his in-house historian, that ultimately the South Vietnamese would have to win the war for themselves, that we could assist, but that we couldn't fight for them. He didn't say this publicly, but he did say it privately. He also shared those views with his brother, Bobby Kennedy, Attorney General. And so, again, we will never know, but there certainly were indications. We do know that there were efforts by disenchanted generals to stage a coup and oust President Diem. And there were two controversial, Diem had been in power, of course, since 1955. Diem is on the right, the Ngo Diem, and his brother, New, N-H-U, is on his left. That's actually his brother-in-law. By the fall of '63, lots of controversies. President Diem was Catholic. The overwhelming majority of the South Vietnamese population was Buddhist. He was persecuting Buddhists. South Vietnamese Buddhists were demonstrating against him. There was repression. There were Buddhists burning themselves alive. Some infamous pictures of that period of time. And New is married to Madame New, who traveled in this country and was well known for having said that when there was a famous picture of a Buddhist burning himself alive in protest, that she enjoyed the barbecue. Yeah, not good. So, and again, there was, government seemingly was on the verge of falling apart. The war wasn't going well on the ground, and so the generals around Diem let the Americans, let Henry Cabot Lodge know that they were thinking of overthrowing the government and trying to replace it with a more effective South Vietnamese government in the war effort. Again, we'll never know exactly what Kennedy said or did, but we know a lot because Richard Nixon is the first one who tape recorded conversations in the Oval Office and in the National Security Center, or the adjoining room to the Oval Office. JFK did. It was the first one who secretly recorded conversations, and we know that he was ambivalent about the coup. He had several meetings, debated back and forth as to whether or not the U.S. should covertly support what was in effect the overthrow of an ally. But he, I think it's fair to say he did not believe that assassination was the answer. And there were arrangements made very quietly by the United States, by Henry Cabot Lodge, that both Ziem and New would be allowed to go into exile. If there was a coup, they'd be allowed to leave the country and go into exile, which of course is something that happens many times in history. And so you get this headline, I think this is November 3rd, I believe. I have new eyes now. I had cataract surgery November the 2nd. Coup in Vietnam disposes Ziem, he and New seized by military, USC's gain and fight on Reds. Palace besieged. Army, Air Force, meaning the South Vietnamese Army and Air Force, and Marines combined to oust. Optimism voiced, American complicity is, of course, denied. Anxiety also expressed. That was the headline that, I guess that would have been the best case scenario if there was going to be a coup. But it didn't last long. Coups are not neat and clean, typically. This one was not. It was bloody. There were tanks blown up, people killed. This is Saigon at the time of the November 2nd, 3rd, that's first, second, third coup. And then the shocking news that they did not go into exile, but that the president and his brother, who was head of internal security and was again very repressive, had been murdered. Their first reports were that they had committed suicide, and then it became very clear that they had been shot in the head. So the worst scenario was the assassination, not the graceful exit trip into exile. I spent some time on that because, again, think of the timing. November 22nd is, 19 days after November the 3rd. And here is a presidential assassination in which the United States did have some complicity. One thing that historians love about JFK is that he had a dictaphone, as they would call it back then, and he would often dictate in the Oval Office typically, but he dictate recordings of events that had happened that he thought he'd want to some days put in his memoirs. Memoirs, of course, were never written. And again, he was a history buff. He won a Pulitzer Prize for Profiles in Courage, which he wrote part of. And it was, he, in fact, a couple days, again, not long before his own assassination, he dictated his thoughts on what had happened. And again, seemingly thoughts that he wanted to have fresh in his mind. You can hear that. You can go on, you can Google it. You can hear John Kennedy's voice and his dictaphone account of what had occurred. And to cut to the chase, he expressed some ambivalence about the coup. He said at one point to himself, well, Ziem was quite the character, and he was becoming increasingly corrupt, but I was shocked by the assassination. Whether or not he was totally shocked or not, he thought he was, or he lied to himself, one of the two. And he also indicated that the manner in which Zia Manu had been murdered, shot in the head, he found especially used the term repulsive and horrendous. The words repulsive and horrendous. You can't help but listen to, and that he found it, their death surprising and, quote, abhorrent. You can't help but listen, as you can do, to JFK's dictaphone thoughts about the coup without getting chills, because you realize he's talking about head of state assassination so soon to November 22nd. The other thing about Vietnam, before I leave it, this is again another picture of the president with Henry Cabot Lodge. Truly an odd couple. They got along very well during this period. The other thing to mention is that Kennedy did consult a wide variety of his aides and some who were unofficially part of the inner circle about whether or not to support a coup. And they were divided. McNamara, for example, might surprise you, was against a coup. George Bundy, the National Security Advisor, was in favor of a coup. And again, there was quite a bit of debate back and forth. And much like with the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy let everybody have their say, and he asked questions, and he liked having a spirited debate before he decided. In all the consultation, and again, we have the records, he consulted with a lot of people within the White House especially. What are we doing here?
What's this week?
Touch your computer screen.
Oh, good. Computer screen is fine.
No, touch it. He said,
Touch the space bar.
Uh-oh.
Now you got it.
Now I've done it.
Just wait. No, wait.
Is that where you wanted to see?
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. Hopefully that will be, I don't know why, because it does not go off on the computer screen. Anyway, my point is, of all the people he was consulting, one person he did not, yes. I'm sorry.
Madame New, did she also get assassinated?
Oh, Madame New probably would have been assassinated, good question, but she was on a speaking tour in the United States.
Barbecue?
She died in 2011.
Yeah, 2011 she died. She completely escaped the coup. Again, if she'd been there, she probably would not have survived.
She knew better.
That's what I like about this group. You know, there's always some good puns that come up during the course.
Well,
Anyway, of all the people he consulted, and there were a lot, again, covertly, quietly, he held meetings. One person he did not ask, what do you think? Should we support a coup of the South Vietnamese government or not? Was Lyndon Johnson, his vice president. Again, you talk about people make history, and events can turn on a dime that have long-term impacts. This is Lyndon Johnson. Remember, he wasn't getting along at all well he was not part of the Kennedy inner circle. He was like many vice presidents who were cut out. And the Attorney General and the President's closest advisor, Bobby Kennedy, absolutely detested Johnson. Of course, this is a man who had been Senate Majority Leader, one of the most powerful men in Washington, reduced to being a vice president who was sent to funerals and sent to ceremonial functions. Part of that in '61, he did a tour of Asia, including this meeting with GM in 1961, Vice President Johnson.
Who's the third person on the stupid train?
I was waiting for you to ask me. That is the ambassador to, U.S. ambassador to South Vietnam before Henry Cabot Lodge, whose name I forget, but that's who it is. And he was, again, very supportive of ZM. Johnson got caught up in that. Maybe that's not the best way to put it, but Johnson was favorably impressed by ZM. He was not terribly troubled by the stories of repression. He thought that just kind of came with the territory. And so it was well known, to the extent that Johnson's views were ever asked or sought, that he was very supportive of ZM and the South Vietnamese government. And he was very optimistic about the way the war was going militarily.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
I don't want to get off topic here, but
Oh, go ahead.
my recollection was back in, what was it, 1955, 56, as you said earlier?
I'm sorry, what?
My recollection is that back in 1955, 56, as you said earlier, there was an agreement to partition North and South Vietnam
Yes,
with elections to be held.
yes.
And the primary reason the North eventually began to invade, if that's the word, the South was ZM never would have those elections held.
That's correct.
Okay.
54 Geneva Accords, supposed to be election within a year. ZM correctly, probably, was not going to allow nationwide elections for North and South Vietnam because he thought he would lose badly to Ho Chi Minh.
Right.
So they never happened. That is true. That is true. By the way, while you cannot defend ZM on that, the American government, Eisenhower in this case, went along. They weren't happy, but they went along. And I guess the key thing to remember there is that a lot of, during the opposition to the war in Vietnam in this country, often that would be said, well, you know, ZM and South Vietnam would not allow free elections throughout all of Vietnam in 55, so it's their, this is their fault. It's also fair, and it was seldom pointed out at the time, that Ho Chi Minh and his number two had been quite ruthless in eliminating all political opposition when there was the division of North and South in the mid-50s after the defeat of the French. And it's estimated that 100,000, maybe far beyond that, people who were opposed to Ho Chi Minh, who did not want a communist government supported by by the Soviet Union or China, were murdered. It was quite, Ho Chi Minh and his number two were quite ruthless during this period of time. And in all these numbers, take with a grain of salt, because nobody really knows. But we think that during this period, 54, 55, that about 1 million North Vietnamese civilians went south. That's how terrible it was, how repressive it was. Again, I mention that only because you can read books that are anti-Vietnam War that will never mention that, which is too bad. Yes?
His name was Frederick Nolte.
Thank you.
His nickname was Nutty.
Nutty?
Nothing.
Nothing Nolte. Nolting, I think. Yeah? Thank you very much. We always have the smartest group in this room. So anyway, I thought it's worth mentioning before I move on that it is interesting that Lyndon Johnson, had he been asked, would have said, no, I'm opposed to a coup. But he wasn't asked. Now, let's turn to the tragedy. I spent some time on Lee Harvey Oswald and his background, and I'm gonna just quickly go through some key points, not all of them, and if you have more questions, stop me at any point and I can elaborate further as we did last time. But this is all under the rubric. I told you we were gonna look at conspiracies. This section of our talk is under the rubric, was Lee Harvey Oswald the assassin? And was he the lone assassin? Or was he part of a conspiracy? I will argue, by the way, that no, he was the lone assassin. There was no conspiracy. Now, keep in mind, as we approach November 22nd of 1963, think of what must have been in Oswald's mind. Rebuffed in many schools growing up, by the time he was 16, he'd been in something like 15 different public schools. His mother had moved around the country. He never did well in school. In Chicago at one point, he was given, the school psychiatrist, more or less, gave him an examination and thought he was potentially dangerous. His mother responded by moving to New York with her son. He'd been in the Marines. He volunteered. His older brother had been in the Marines. He went into the Marines when he was, he said he was 17. He actually was 16. That did not go well. He wound up being eventually dishonorably discharged. And he told everybody who would listen when he was in the Marines that he was a communist. He subscribed to the Daily Worker and made quite a point of that.
Do you have any idea what the cause of his dishonorable discharge was?
Yeah, he got into a fight. He got into a fight with an officer, fist fight.
Oh.
And he was first in the brig, and then he was discharged, and then he made the mistake of petitioning to have his dishonorable discharge, or his dishonorably changed, and instead it was reaffirmed.
Okay.
So it was for the fight with an officer, and he was in the brig for a while. So that didn't go well. Then he immediately defects to the Soviet Union after he gets out of the Marines. He has this rosy view of Marxist, Leninist philosophy. He thought he would be treated as a big deal for the first time in his life because he was a ex-US Marine defecting to the Soviet Union and giving interviews saying how much he detested the United States, US foreign policy in particular. That also didn't go well. He found out that he was famous in getting interviews in the Soviet press for a couple weeks, and then he was forgotten, and then he was shuttled off out of Moscow to a blue-collar kind of job, no glamour, no interviews. He did meet Marina and marry her, but he became very disillusioned, and then he got word the Soviets were tired of him and thought his usefulness for propaganda was up. They told him he was going to have to leave the Soviet Union and go back to the United States, that in effect his visa was going to be up. And Oswald responded by trying to kill himself. Again, you see a pattern with a man who has strong emotions. He tried to kill himself. He underwent Soviet psychiatric evaluation. To make not too fine a point of it, they thought he was kind of nuts. And that he suffered from a huge sense of his own self-importance, and that he was no longer news value to the Soviet Union. So he was sent back. And by the way, when Oswald got back to Dallas, he was met by his brother, and of course he has his wife Marina with him, his older brother, the ex-Marine who had served honorably. And he was shocked that there wasn't a gaggle of reporters there to interview him. Again, he thought he was a big deal. And there were no reporters, in which he was chagrined about that. And then we see another turn to violence or use of his fists and weapons. He, in 1963, in the spring, he decides to assassinate, I left this picture out. He decides to assassinate General Edward Walker. Edward Walker was a retired general. He'd run for governor of Texas. He was on the cover of Time magazine. He was a rising far-right political figure and sharp critic of among others, the Kennedy administration and the people in Washington. And Oswald got it in his head that this man was going to be, he was speaking around the country, and that General Walker was going to probably become governor and then maybe president one day, and that he was the next Hitler. So he got in his mind, well, the way to resolve this is to kill him. And he did on March the 12th, he didn't kill him, but on March the 12th, he ordered from American Rifleman magazine a rifle. He paid $21.45 to a Chicago-based mail order house. He used A. Hedel, a pseudonym. It was an Italian military rifle, 6.5, is that millimeter, I guess? Man-lifter Carcano, and the key point was it had a 4-power scope. It was a rifle with a scope, as you can see there. Skipping the details what we went through last time, but what's important is that tests were done with this rifle in the years that followed, found that maybe a cheap rifle, but with the scope, you could be very accurate up to a certain range, 200 yards or less. You could be very accurate because of the scope. And they also discovered that the bullets he was using, they fired them over and over and over again in this gun in the months and years that followed. And the rifle never misfired. So inexpensive, but it really, for his purposes, was not a bad rifle to have. Again, the telescopic sight being the key. He did try to assassinate, this is March, General Walker in his home. He was in his study. He thought he killed him. He didn't. He hit the windowsill and it ricocheted. And there was blood, but not a serious injury. Walker escaped, and it made the newspapers in Dallas, but Walker escaped, and Oswald had failed in his effort in his assassination of General Walker. Yes?
One thing, when Oswald was in the Marines, I don't know, for 2 years or whatever it was.
Yeah.
My understanding was he attained a designation as a marksman or sharpshooter.
Yeah, he did. He was a marksman.
Where supposedly he had showed he was pretty good with a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, to qualify that in the Marine Corps, there's marksman, sharpshooter, and expert. And so he had the lowest
Yes,
shooting.
he did. He did.
And that, you know,
But it was still the marksman quality.
yeah.
And he also took it again right before he was discharged, and it was about the same. So, you'll see, for example, in the movie JFK and many books, that he was a lousy shot. Well, you're correct. He wasn't a lousy shot. He also wasn't a great shot. But one area in the Marines, they discovered if he could get in a crouched, semi-sitting position and lean against something like a carton, that his accuracy went way up. And of course, we forget how close he was to the presidential limousine when he turned in front of Dallas School Book Depository. So you're not wrong, but it also seems that he could have been adequate. Could he have made the shot? Is a better way to put it. Seems he could have made the shot. And of course, needless to say, in the months and years that followed, many people tried to replicate using the gun, using the bullets, using the exact location. They even used a presidential limousine look-alike with cadavers in the appropriate seats to see how human bodies would react to shots at that range. They could repeat it over. Now, these are different marksmen, but they could repeat it over and over and over. So you'd have to say, you're correct, but it wasn't impossible for him to have made the shot. The other thing, as long as we're talking about that, remember, he wasn't that accurate. There were 3 shots fired. Warren Commission got this wrong. Is it better? Warren Commission got it wrong. They thought that the first shot and the third shot are the ones that hit the president. That was wrong. It's the second and third, as we subsequently learned. The first shot he missed. And we never found that bullet. Did you all know that? I thought that was something I didn't know until preparing for this class. The first shot that Oswald fired at the president, he missed. And we never found the bullet, although we did find fragments on the pavement near the limousine that we think could well have been from the first bullet. But it was never recovered. And then he fired a second time at the president. He did hit him, but again, while he hit him in the back shoulder, and it came out through his neck around about this point where you'd have a tie. But he didn't kill him. If it had stopped there, I think doctors universally have concluded President Kennedy would have lived. He might have been impaired. He might have gone through a period of recovering his voice, but that he wouldn't have died.
Second bullet also hit Conway, didn't it?
And the second bullet is the one that went through the pristine bullet, so-called, and hit Conway as well. And we'll come back to that with a little chart in a moment. But you're right. And then it's the third shot that killed the president. That's the one that hit him in the back of the head and went into his brain and was fatal. He came out the front. Incredibly gruesome. So you could make the argument, well, he only hit the president 2 out of 3 times, and the second one didn't kill him. So you could say, what for his purposes of murder, it took him 3 shots to do it. Is that a good answer to your question? Is that helpful to is that a good answer? You want to revise or expand my remarks? We also have, I'll come back to that. We also have, I'm not going to go through it again unless you want. He goes to New Orleans, Fair Play for Cuba Committee. You've all seen the photographs. He's handing out pamphlets in New Orleans, pro-Castro, anti-U.S. policy like the previous effort in the Bay of Pigs. what is often overlooked by that is that while he did hand out little leaflets and he actually had a card, there was a Fair Play for Cuba committee in New York. His membership was one, him. And there's a famous series of pictures where he's handing out leaflets in New Orleans, and there's two men helping him. These turned out to be two men from the unemployment office that he paid $10 apiece to help him hand out the leaflets. So he was very unsuccessful in his efforts in New Orleans for Castro, and he kept writing the head of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New York, and after a while, the head of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee stopped responding. Again, another example where he seems to have tried something and ultimately was a failure. The other thing, and am I going too long on this, or is this helpful? Is this helpful? Too long?
Yeah, 2 minutes. Little long.
Too long? A little long? Okay, and we just mentioned, don't forget, he went in September, he went to Mexico City. And he met with the Soviet and the Soviet and the Mexican embassies. No, the Cuban and the Soviet embassies, September 27th, 28th. This is a picture he took to try to get a visa. He wanted to go, presumably with his wife, but we're not sure, and kids. He wanted a visa to go to Cuba, because by now he was disillusioned with the Soviet Union, disillusioned with the United States, but Castro was the man. He was the true revolutionary in his mind. So he was trying to go, and does this man look like he might be a KGB agent? In central casting, as Trump would say, Oleg Nachaporenko. I won't spell it for you, you don't care. But he was the person principally who met with, on 2 occasions, September 27th, 28th, at the embassies. In this case, it was the Russian embassy. Oswald went and had his picture taken for the visa he wanted to get, and it was turned down. After discussing with him, and he went through how he had defected to the Soviet Union, which raised the question, well, why did you come back? And why did you say angry things about the Russian government? And so he was denied. Now, that's important for one reason. Think of the date, September 27th, 28th. On September the 25th, so while he's on the bus going to the embassies in Mexico, the United States, the White House announced that President Kennedy would be going to Texas in November, late November. So that's when the word came out. Whether or not Castro or Oswald knew that or not, very, very doubtful, really. Now, here's a case of a mistake and a cover-up that we cannot explain away for conspiracy buffs. This is John McCone being sworn in as head of the Central Intelligence Agency. Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs, got rid of Allen Dulles and replaced him with his guy, John McCone. John McCone would proceed after the assassination and during the investigation, during his testimony before the Warren Commission, Congress, and elsewhere, he would not tell everything he knew. He did not tell the Warren Commission, for example, or the Congress, that the CIA conducted a cover-up after the Mexico City Cuban embassy incident with Oswald. Why? Well, partially they were embarrassed. You know, this is the Cold War. We covered who came and went from Soviet and Cuban embassies every day. We knew that a former Soviet American defected to the Soviet Union was there. We knew he was meeting with high officials in those two embassies. We also apparently knew that he did not get a visa. So after the assassination and during the Warren Commission, what did the CIA do? What did it explain to everybody that, well, you know, we did know he was there and trying to get a visa? Zip, silence. Nothing was said. CIA was embarrassed, undoubtedly. They also had a big secret they didn't want revealed. And it wasn't the assassination. We had tried to kill Fidel Castro 3 times at least. And since the Bay of Pigs invasion, CIA didn't want that known, and it wouldn't be known for many more years. So it was just best to gloss over Oswald's trip to Mexico City. Is that clear? You getting that? Okay. 2 more quick things. November 12th, we're getting close. Oswald mails a letter to the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. One, he tells them about his trip to Mexico, and he complains. And I neglected to say that after his visa was turned down by the gentleman I just showed you, Oswald drew a gun and was quite upset and was ordered to leave. So it did not go well. Again, another linchpin, another clue that Oswald was at least attracted to violence or threat of violence. So he wrote it November the 12th. He informs the Soviet embassy in Washington, where Pat and I wandered in one day. And he asked them to please pay attention, expedite his efforts to get visas to Cuba. Nothing came of that. Also, November the 12th, the same day, and again, without going into great detail, James Hosty, who was the Dallas FBI agent, who, among other things, was following many people who were questionable, and one was this ex-Marine who had defected to the Soviet Union and come back, and he'd gone out and he'd interviewed Marina Oswald, the wife, in the suburbs. Oswald got wind of that. He was very angry. He went to this building, the 12th floor of the FBI headquarters in Dallas, left a nasty letter for James Hosty. This is James Hosty, the FBI agent, and in effect threatened him. Said, if you want anything you want to learn about me, come talk to me directly. If you don't cease bothering my wife, I will take appropriate action and report this to the proper authorities. Again, another clue there about Oswald. They're getting closer, they, the FBI, but no effective follow-up. On November the 14th, and this is important, everything I say is important, right? November the 14th, the White House releases the route that the President and Jackie will take from Love Field to the Dallas trademark. And this was published in the Dallas newspapers 2 or 3 days, I think 2 and 3 days, before November 22nd. And we know that Oswald at the book depository read the papers. He wouldn't buy them, he'd read day-old papers. So he undoubtedly, we can presume, saw that. We also know it was a very tense time. This was widely circulated, this handbill throughout Dallas. This man wanted for treason, betraying the Constitution, turning the sovereignty of the U.S. over to the communist-controlled UN, betraying our friends in Cuba, so forth and so on. Illegally invaded a sovereign state with federal troops. That's civil rights enforcement.
Which state, Alabama?
The state was Mississippi.
Mississippi.
No, it was Alabama. I take it back. It was George Wallace.
Right.
And then later Mississippi. Anyway, the litany, and again, this was widely circulated. You could find these pamphlets posted all over town, and gives you a feel for the times. November 21st, Oswald goes to see his wife, from whom he is estranged, Marina, who's staying at the home of Ruth Payne, a friend. By the way, why did Ruth Payne and other women who had Russian backgrounds themselves, why did they take in and try to help Marina? Oswald were not fond at all of Lee. Why? Because he abused his wife. He beat his wife. Sometimes she'd show up with black eyes. People knew it, and especially the women had a very dim view of Lee Oswald. They were estranged, and he came to visit on a Thursday, the 21st, and this is important. This is Ruth Payne's garage, and in the garage was a package that contained the rifle. The rifle that we'd seen in the picture, the rifle that would be used the next day. He also made repeated efforts to get, saying he would, to Marina that night, saying he would reform, they could move, he'd buy her a washing machine, they get their own place. All of which, by the way, was a man who was on a minimum wage temporary job assignment at the book depository. Very doubtful he had the money for that. But he lied a lot, and he made all kinds of promises to Marina, who no longer believed him and rebuffed him and said no, she would not reunite with him. You know, some historians have said that they made up that night. Maybe he wouldn't have gone to the book depository the next morning. Again, we'll never know. This, by the way, is Marina and her mother and Ruth Payne, where they were staying, and their two children, one of whom had just been born, Oswald's children, who had just been born. For the record, they're all three alive. The Marina Oswald and her two daughters are still living today. They're up in years, but they're still living today. She remarried, her second husband also died. Marina remarried, changed her name, and changed the name of her children, trying to get away from the Oswald name. And the children had a very difficult time through public schools because eventually, you know, they'd be in school for a while, maybe a few months, somebody would figure out who their late father was, and then they would have to move again. But that is that story, and I guess I said that's Ruth Payne, who was staying with them. This is the school book depository.
James,
Yes.
it's cookie time.
It is cookie time. For those of you who are new, we break halfway through, although I never know when because there's no clock in here. And we have cookies for a few minutes and then reconvene in 5 or 10 minutes. also any other courtesy visits you have to make. Let me say one thing and I'll stop because we're up to where we should be. And that is, it's at this time, it's in these few days, that Oswald, who is still planning to again try to assassinate General Walker, discovers by reading the papers and talking to his colleagues that the president's motorcade is going to make a turn and come right in front of the school book depository. So that's why when he goes back the night before to see Marina, he also goes to the garage and retrieves the rifle and takes it with him. And with that, we are pretty well caught up to where we were last time.
Well,
Was that okay? And we will resume after the cookies.